The year 1922 settled over the hills of Appalachia like a slow-moving fog, thick and cold, and always carrying a quiet weight. The people who lived in the deep folds of those mountains had grown used to the land's silence, but they also knew it never stayed peaceful for long. The ravine that cut through the woods outside the small town of Briar's Hollow was one of those places locals avoided without asking why. It wasn't marked on any map, and no one spoke its name with ease. Some called it Witch's Ravine, but only when they had no other choice. To most, it was just the cut a place you didn't go when the light began to fade. Before the crime, life in Briar's Hollow moved in its usual rough rhythm. Families farmed small plots of land that barely gave enough, children walked miles to the single-room schoolhouse, and men spent their evenings in the dim light of the general store, trading stories they all knew too well. Homes were built from old timber, and smoke from stone chimneys curled into the darkening sky like quiet prayers. Everything was worn and familiar. People lived simple lives molded by hunger, hard work, and the sharp understanding that the world didn't give second chances. That daily life wrapped itself around three people who, at the time, moved through the town like everyone else. A girl who rarely raised her voice, a man who walked with a silent confidence that unsettled those around him, and another man who tried to keep himself invisible. They were not strangers to one another, though the town didn't know how close their lives truly were. Each one carried things they never spoke about, small truths that pressed against their ribs and waited for the moment they would finally break open. The girl lived with her mother in a cabin that leaned slightly to the left, as if tired of staying upright against years of storms. She was young but carried a kind of quiet hardness in her eyes. People said she had grown up too fast, and some whispered the reason, though no one dared say it when her mother was near. She kept to herself, working the small patch of land behind their home and walking into town only when she had to. Even then, she kept her gaze low, almost as if she feared what she would see if she looked anyone in the eye. The man with the confident walk was the opposite. He filled every space he stepped into. Tall, well-fed, and always dressed better than the rest of the hollow, he came from a family that owned much of the land around town. Folks depended on him more than they liked, and he knew it. When he spoke, people listened, not because they wanted to, but because life in Briar's Hollow could get harder if they didn't. He liked that power. It followed him, thick as his shadow, and he carried it even when he wandered near the ravine, searching for solitude no one dared disturb. The third man blended into the background. Thin, tired, and always with dirt under his nails, he worked odd jobs and slept in a shack near the creek. He wasn't dangerous, not in the way most people used the word, but there was something fragile about him, as if one wrong moment could push him into doing something he could never undo. He watched the town from a distance, speaking only when spoken to, and even then offering answers so soft they were almost whispers. People him more than anything. But sometimes pity can twist into something darker when the right pressure is applied. On the surface, nothing connected these three in a way that would make anyone suspicious. They lived their days as everyone else did, waking at sunrise, working until their bodies ached, and going home to the same small routines. Yet even before the crime, if you looked closely, you could see how their paths were quietly pulling toward each other. The girl's mother had debts she could never repay, and the confident man was not the type to forget what was owed to him. His visits to their cabin grew more frequent, always at times when the girl's mother wasn't home. He would stand close to the girl, speaking softly but with an edge she could feel even when she refused to look at him. She didn't have the power to push him away, and he seemed to enjoy reminding her of that. The quiet man, meanwhile, often walked past the girl's cabin on his way to collect firewood or check his traps. He noticed things, shadows under the girl's eyes, the way she flinched when someone spoke too loudly, the tension around her shoulders that never seemed to ease. He was not brave, but he wasn't blind either. Sometimes he paused at the edge of the woods, watching the confident man step through the cabin door without knocking. Each time something twisted in his chest, something that was quite anger but wasn't fear either, something in between. The town itself felt the shift long before anyone admitted it. People grew quieter when the girl passed by. The woods took on a heavier silence. Even the ravine felt different, as though it was waiting for something. Stories began to move again, old tales about women who vanished there, about strange cries that echoed through the trees, about the land holding the weight of secrets it refused to release. Life remained normal on the outside, but the normalcy had cracks. Small ones at first, almost invisible, like tiny breaks in ice that can hold a person's weight, until the moment it can't anymore. Power had begun to move in quiet ways. A man who believed he was untouchable. a girl trapped between fear and anger she didn't yet understand, and a fragile man who felt something growing inside him, something he didn't know how to name. They all lived their lives as if nothing had changed, but the truth was simple. The world they stood in was already tilting. The air in Appalachia in 1922 carried more than the cold. It carried the first quiet signs that something was coming, something heavy, something violent, something that would someday be whispered about in Briar's hollow for generations. The fragile calm of their lives was already breaking, and none of them knew how close they were to the moment when everything would fall apart. The tension in Briar's hollow did not arrive all at once. It slid in slowly, quiet and steady, like water seeping through cracks in a wall until the whole thing is ready to collapse. By the end of winter, the small changes in behavior that people first brushed off as tiredness or bad luck began to reveal themselves as something more. Even the mountains seemed to feel it. The air carried a strange tightness, and the nights held a silence too deep to ignore. The girl sensed the shift before anyone else. She had grown used to keeping her emotions locked inside, but lately she found herself waking in the middle of the night with a feeling she could not explain. It sat heavily on her chest. Some nights she walked outside, stepping barefoot on the cold dirt, staring at the tree line as though something inside those woods was calling to her. Other nights she stayed in bed, hands clenched tight, listening to the wind push against the cabin walls. Her mother, overworked and exhausted, barely noticed the change. She was too busy trying to stretch thin coins into enough food for the week, unaware that her attempts to keep them afloat had only tied them to the man who never stopped coming around. His visits grew longer as winter dragged on. He no longer bothered pretending his presence was for business. He walked through the door with the easy confidence of someone who believed he owned everything he touched. He watched the girl with eyes that made her want to shrink into herself, but she never looked away for long. She had learned that if she acted too afraid, he enjoyed it. If she acted too bold, he enjoyed that too. There was no safe way to act around him anymore. He began leaving gifts on their table: flour, sugar, coffee, items her mother desperately needed but hated accepting. She told the girl she would find a way to pay him back. They always said the same thing, yet the pile of debts only grew. The girl saw the truth long before her mother did. These gifts were not acts of kindness. They were chains. With each one, he tightened his control without ever raising his voice. The quiet man noticed the change too, though he tried hard not to let it show. He had always kept his distance from the town's troubles, believing that as long as he stayed small and silent, nothing would reach him. But each time he passed the girl's cabin on his way to gather firewood, he saw new signs of tension. Shattered pottery swept into a corner, deeper lines around the girl's mouth, bruises on her mother's arms that had no explanation. What he didn't see was the man leaving the cabin minutes before, brushing dust from his coat. There were days when the quiet man felt an anger rise inside him so fast it frightened him. He didn't understand why he cared so much. The girl was kind to him, that was true, but she had never asked him for help. She barely spoke to him at all. Still, he felt something pulling him toward her situation, something he could not explain without exposing his own past. He had not always been invisible. Years ago, he had worked on the man's land as one of many hands who labored from sunrise to sunset. Back then, he had a wife and a small son. They lived in a cabin at the edge of the woods, close enough to the ravine that they could hear the wind whistle through it at night. One winter, a storm swept through the hollow. Heavy snow collapsed their roof. His wife and child were trapped inside. He had run to the man for help, begging for extra hands to lift the beams. But the man had refused, claiming the workers were too far away to spare. By the time the quiet man dug through the snow alone, his family was gone. The town him, but pity did nothing to fill the grave he dug with his own hands. Since then he stayed small, stayed quiet. But when he saw the girl's mother struggling under the same man's control, old wounds began to open. It scared him how quickly the buried memories came back. Meanwhile, the man's behavior grew more unpredictable as the days wore on. His calm confidence now shifted into something sharper. He drank more, spoke louder, and seemed annoyed by anyone who didn't immediately bend to his wishes. His wealth had always placed him above the town, but now he treated that difference like a weapon. When people looked at him, they lowered their eyes. He enjoyed that. He expected it. And when someone didn't show enough fear, it unsettled him more than he would admit. He began following the girl with his gaze whenever she walked through town. People noticed but chose silence. No one wanted to challenge a man who could decide whether their family worked next season or went hungry. The girl tried to ignore him, but each time she felt his eyes on her, her stomach twisted. Her world felt smaller every day, as though the mountains themselves were closing in. The pressure grew inside the cabin, too. Her mother worked longer hours cleaning houses, leaving the girl alone more often. The man took advantage of those hours. He showed up without warning, letting himself into the cabin with an ease that made her sick. He asked her questions she didn't want to answer. Sometimes he touched things in the house, her books, her sewing needles, the small carved wooden bird her father had left behind. It felt like he was marking his place, reminding her that nothing inside those walls truly belonged to her. One evening, the quiet man walked by just as the man was leaving the cabin. Their eyes met for a brief moment. It was not a greeting, it was a warning. The quiet man felt his heart thud in his chest and he quickly looked away, but something dark sparked between them. The man saw something in the quiet man's eyes that he didn't like, recognition maybe, or judgment. Whatever it was, the man stepped closer, stopping just inches away. "You got business here?" he asked, voice low. The quiet man swallowed hard and shook his head. The man stared at him another second before walking off, leaving the quiet man frozen, breath shallow. He realized then that his silence would not keep him safe much longer. As spring approached, tensions tightened like a rope pulled too far. The girl noticed that her mother no longer slept well. She woke in the middle of the night, packing the small cabin, whispering half-thought prayers under her breath. She spoke less and snapped more easily. Sometimes she stared out the window with a look of fear she tried hard to hide. The girl knew her mother was carrying something she had not shared, something heavy enough to keep her awake. One afternoon, the girl overheard her mother speaking to a neighbor on the road. Her mother's voice was low, shaky. She said she had made a mistake she couldn't fix. She said the man was growing impatient. She said she feared something awful was coming. The neighbor tried to calm her, but the mother turned away quickly, as though even saying the words out loud was dangerous. The girl wanted to ask what mistake her mother meant, but every time she tried, her mother brushed it aside. "It's nothing you need to worry about," she said, but the girl was already worried. She felt the danger creeping closer every day. The quiet man, too, felt the change. He started avoiding certain paths, afraid he might cross the man again. He kept to the deeper woods, staying out longer than usual. The forest, once a place where he felt safe, now carried a strange tension. Birds flew off suddenly for no clear reason. The wind moved in restless patterns, and sometimes when he walked too near the ravine, he swore he heard whispers, small, broken sounds drifting from below. He told himself it was just the wind bouncing off the stone walls, but deep down, something colder stirred. He began having dreams again, nightmares he thought he had buried years ago. In them, he saw his wife reaching out to him through the snow. He saw his small son calling for him from the ravine. But this time, the dreams twisted into something new. He saw the girl standing beside them, trapped in the same cold darkness. When he woke, his chest hurt as if he had been holding his breath for hours. The man's grip on the town tightened too. A rumor spread that he had fired 2 workers for speaking against him. Another rumor said he had threatened a family who owed him money. People lived in fear but pretended everything was fine. No one wanted to be the next target. In towns like Briar's Hollow, silence wasn't just common, it was survival. Behind closed doors, the man nursed his growing obsession with the girl. He convinced himself that she owed him something, though he never said what. The more she avoided him, the more determined he became. He told himself it was admiration, even affection, but the truth was darker. It was control, pure and simple. The girl sensed his intentions but felt trapped. Some nights she lay awake imagining running away, but she had nowhere to go. Her mother depended on her. The town offered no safety, and the woods, especially near the ravine, held dangers she didn't fully understand. The breaking point began quietly, as most dangerous things do. One day, while the girl fetched water from the creek, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw the man standing a few feet away, smiling a smile that never reached his eyes. She stepped back, heart racing, but he lifted a hand as if to calm her. "You don't have to be afraid," he said gently, though his tone sent a shiver through her spine. She didn't answer. She knew that silence was safer. He stepped closer anyway, too close. "I've been patient," he said. "Your mother knows what she owes, and I know you're smart enough to understand what happens when debts go unpaid." The girl felt her throat tighten. She stayed still, afraid that running might make things worse. Before he could say more, the quiet man appeared from the tree line. He looked startled, like he had stumbled onto something he wasn't supposed to see. The man's expression shifted instantly, from softness to cold anger. The quiet man froze, unsure whether to run or speak. This moment hung in the air like a storm cloud. The girl watched both men, uncertain which direction danger would strike from first. The man stepped toward the quiet man, shoulders squared. "You following me?" he snapped. "No," the quiet man whispered, "just cutting through." The man stared at him, then laughed, a short, cruel sound. "Careful where you cut, some places aren't meant for you." The quiet man lowered his gaze, shame burning through him. The girl saw the humiliation on his face and felt a sharp sadness she couldn't explain. After the man walked away, the quiet man stood still for a long moment. His hands shook, not from fear, but from something deeper, something that had been buried for years, now clawing its way back up. That night, the girl told her mother about the creek encounter. Her mother went pale. She didn't scold her for being alone. She didn't say they would be all right. She simply sat down, hands trembling, eyes filling with a fear the girl had never seen before. "He's losing patience," her mother whispered. "And when he loses patience, people get hurt." The girl swallowed hard. "What did you promise him?" Her mother shook her head, breathing unevenly. "I didn't promise anything. I just owed him money, but he doesn't want money anymore." The truth settled between them like a shadow. The girl understood enough. She felt anger rise in her chest, hot and sharp, but her mother silenced her with a look. "You can't fight him," she said. "No one wins when they go against a man like that." But the girl quietly wondered if doing nothing was worse. Meanwhile, the man's obsession deepened into something darker. He began spending his nights wandering near the ravine, packing the edge as though arguing with someone only he could hear. Some neighbors noticed his strange behavior, but they dismissed it as stress or drink. No one wanted to consider that a man with his power could be losing control. The quiet man also found himself drawn toward the ravine, though for different reasons. He felt the pull of old memories, old pain. And he also felt something new, that the girl's safety rested on a knife's edge, and he might be the only one willing to step between her and danger. He didn't think of himself as brave, but fear can turn into courage when the alternative is watching history repeat itself. By early summer, the paths of these three people, once separate, were now tangled so tightly that there was no way to pull them apart. Every choice they made twisted the rope. Every encounter added weight. Every secret brought them closer to a dark moment none of them could avoid. The town sensed something brewing, though they didn't know what. People spoke in quiet tones. The air grew heavier. The nights echoed strangely, and near the ravine, birds stopped singing altogether. The girl felt it every time she walked through the woods. The quiet man felt it every time he saw the man watching her. And the man felt it every time he realized he was losing the control he believed he owned. Something was coming, something born from fear, anger, obsession, and old wounds that never healed. And once it arrived, no one in Briar's Hollow would ever forget it. The night the crime unfolded began like any other, but there was something wrong in the air, something thick and heavy, like a storm rolling in with no thunder to announce it. A strange heat clung to the mountains even after the sun dropped behind and the trees along the ravine stood so still that not a single leaf shivered. The quiet man later said that even the birds seemed to know something was about to happen, because they vanished long before darkness fully settled. But in the hours before it all broke open, no one truly understood how close they were to the point of no return. Girl had spent the day trying to help her mother, hopping to pull her out of the fearful fog she lived in. But her mother barely spoke, moving through the chores like someone half asleep. Every small sound made her flinch. She checked the door again and again, making sure it was locked, though the lock was too weak to stop much of anything. When the girl asked what was wrong, her mother simply said, "Just stay close tonight. Don't wander." There was a trembling in her voice that the girl had never heard before. The man, meanwhile, had spent his day packing his house like a trapped animal. The more he drank, the faster he moved. Rage and frustration twisted inside him, fighting for space with the strange longing that had taken root in his mind. He couldn't think straight anymore. Every time he tried to focus, his thoughts snapped back to the girl, her silence, her fear, the way she recoiled when he came too near. It made him feel powerful. It made him feel robbed. It made him feel that she owed him, something he was finally done waiting for. By late evening, he was shaking with the pressure inside him. Something in him had cracked. He lit a lantern, grabbed his coat, and stormed out of his house with a purpose that had nothing to do with reason. The quiet man had been near the woods that evening, trying to lose himself in work, chopping fallen branches, mending broken traps, doing anything to numb the growing sense that danger was creeping toward the girl's cabin. But as darkness gathered, he felt a pull toward the ravine. It wasn't logical. It wasn't even a clear thought. It was more like a whisper inside him, a small voice saying, "Go." He hesitated only a moment before following the narrow path that led through the woods toward the cabin. The girl was inside, trying to calm her mother when they heard it, heavy footsteps on the porch boards, not the hesitant tap of a neighbor or the cautious step of someone seeking help. These were deliberate, slow, and steady. Her mother went pale and stood so still the girl wondered if she had stopped breathing. The door shook as the man pounded on it once, twice. The girl's heart leaped into her throat. "Open up," he called, his voice low and slurred with drink but steady. "You and I need to talk." Her mother whispered, "Don't move, don't make a sound." But the pounding grew harder, angrier. The girl could hear the wood starting to crack under his fist. The mother stepped toward the door as if to stand between her daughter and the danger outside, but the girl grabbed her arm, shaking her head. Her mother's eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. The man kicked the door then, once, twice. The frame split. A scream slipped from the mother's mouth before she could stop it. On the third kick, the lock snapped and the door crashed inward, slamming against the wall. He stepped inside, lantern in one hand, rage in the other. His eyes found the girl instantly, and the hunger in them made her stomach twist. "You think you can hide?" he asked, voice shaking. "You think you can pretend you don't know what's owed?" Her mother stepped forward, shouting for him to leave. She pushed against him, but he shoved her aside with one arm as though she weighed nothing. She hit the floor hard, gasping as pain shot through her ribs. Something inside the girl snapped at that. Fear and anger collided so violently that she couldn't separate them anymore. She grabbed the closest thing she could find, a wooden stool, and raised it as he approached her. He laughed, a horrible, breathless laugh. "You don't scare me," he said. "None of you do." He reached for her, his fingers brushed her arm. That was when the quiet man burst through the half-broken doorway. He had heard the shouting from outside. The moment he saw the man reaching for the girl, everything he had buried, every loss, every failure rose in him like a flood. "Get away from her," he said, voice trembling but loud enough to stop the man cold. The man turned slowly, surprise flashing across his face before it sharpened into anger. "You again," he growled. "I warned you." The two men stared at each other. The girl barely breathed. Her mother pushed herself up on shaking arms, watching with wide, terrified eyes. The man stepped toward the quiet man, lantern swinging, jaw clenched. "You don't get to step into matters that don't involve you." But the quiet man didn't move. His chest heaved. His hands shook, not from fear, but from years of buried rage finally clawing its way to the surface. "It involves me," he said softly, "because you make it everyone's business. You take and think no one will ever stop you." The man swung the lantern at him. The quiet man dodged, but the lantern crashed against the wall, the flame bursting outward as oil splashed across the wood. Fire climbed the wall instantly, catching the dry boards like they had been waiting for it. The girl screamed. Her mother scrambled to her feet. The man lunged at the quiet man, grabbing him by the collar. The quiet man stumbled backward, trying to break free. They crashed into a table, knocking it over. The fire spread faster than anyone could have expected. Heat filled the cabin in seconds. The girl grabbed her mother and dragged her toward the door, coughing as smoke thickened. But her mother resisted, shouting that the quiet man needed help. The girl turned back just in time to see the man shove the quiet man to the ground and reach for something, a hunting knife he carried at his side. His face was twisted with a fury that no longer looked human. The quiet man scrambled to his knees, but the man was already lifting the knife. The girl didn't think. She ran forward, grabbed the fallen lantern's iron base, and struck the man across the back of the head with every ounce of strength she had. The sound was sickening, a dull crack. His body went stiff, then limp. The knife slipped from his hand. He fell forward, collapsing onto the dirt floor. Silence filled the cabin for half a second before the roaring flames swallowed it. The quiet man stared at the girl, shock pouring across his face. Her chest heaved. Her hands shook violently around the iron lantern base. The man on the floor didn't move. The quiet man crawled forward and rolled him onto his back. Blood seeped from the wound at the base of his skull, dark and spreading. His eyes were half open but empty, already gone. The girl felt the world tilt. She dropped the lantern base, which hit the floor with a heavy thud. Her knees buckled and the quiet man caught her before she fell. "We have to go," he whispered urgently. The fire's too fast." Her mother reached them, grabbing the girl's arm and pulling her toward the door. Flames licked the ceiling. Smoke thickened so quickly that it burned their eyes. But before leaving, the quiet man looked back at the dead body. His face twisted with something the girl could not read: fear, guilt, and a strange relief all mixed into one. They stumbled outside as the cabin roof caught fire behind them. Heat washed over their backs. The girl dropped to her knees in the dirt, coughing uncontrollably. Her mother wrapped her arms around her, whispering her name over and over. The quiet man stood a few feet away, staring at the burning cabin with hollow eyes. "What do we do?" the girl choked out, voice shaking. Her mother looked toward the ravine, its dark mouth open like the entrance to something ancient and unforgiving. "We can't tell anyone," she whispered. "They won't believe us. They'll only see what we did, what you did." The girl felt tears burn her eyes. "I didn't mean to." "I know," her mother said, holding her, "but it won't matter." The quiet man finally spoke, voice barely above a breath. We have to move him before the fire is out, before anyone comes." The girl stared at him in disbelief. "Move him where?" He looked toward the ravine, jaw trembling. "There," he said. "It's the only place no one goes." Her mother closed her eyes, pain flickering across her face, but she nodded. The girl felt her heart hammering as the three of them stood between the burning cabin and the ravenous darkness of the ravine. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. All she knew was that the night had split open, and nothing would ever be the same. Together, trembling and terrified, they stepped back into the firelit cabin to drag the man's body toward the woods, toward the ravine that had been waiting all along. And once they crossed that line, there would be no turning back. The fire burned through the cabin long before anyone in Briar's Hollow realized something terrible had happened. By the time neighbors saw the glow rising above the treetops and came running with buckets and blankets, the place was already collapsing in on itself, sending sparks into the night sky like scattered stars. People shouted for the girl and her mother, but the two of them were already hidden deep in the woods with the quiet man, trying to steady their shaking breaths as the flames lit the forest behind them. No one asked where the man who terrorized them had gone. No one even thought to. The fire pulled all attention toward itself, buying the three of them more time than they deserved. The body was heavy. He had been a large man even in life, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, and the dead weight only made things harder. The girl and her mother carried the lantern light while the quiet man dragged the body by the arms, each pull scraping leaves and dirt from the forest floor. The girl tried not to look at his face, but every time the lantern swung, its dim glow revealed flashes of his slack jaw and half-open eyes. She wished she could forget that she was the one who struck the blow. But every reminder of it sat heavy in her chest, refusing to loosen its hold. The deeper they moved into the woods, the colder it grew. The night air carried the scent of the ravine long before they reached it, damp earth, stone, and something metallic that the girl couldn't name but felt in her teeth. When the trees opened and the edge of the ravine came into view, the girl stopped breathing for a moment. It was wider than she remembered. Darker, too. The moon barely touched it, leaving its depths completely hidden. Her mother whispered, "Let's make this quick," voice breaking. The quiet man said nothing. He simply nodded, bracing himself. They worked together to roll the body toward the edge. With one final push, gravity took the rest. The man slid over the side, his body hitting the rock wall once before disappearing into the darkness below. The girl didn't hear a final thud, just silence, as if the ravine had swallowed him whole. Her mother covered her face with both hands. Whether it was a prayer or a curse, she spoke into them, the girl couldn't tell. The quiet man stepped back, staring down at the ravine with a hollow, haunted expression. The girl wondered what it reminded him of, what memories he had buried that now forced their way back to the surface. When they finally left the ravine and made their way toward the back roads of town, dawn had already begun to break. The sky turned a faint gray-blue, wiping away the stars one by one. Smoke still curled upward from the girl's home. Neighbors stood in quiet gatherings, faces streaked with soot and confusion. Some stared at the blackened remains of the cabin. Others whispered among themselves. No one noticed the three figures emerging from the woods, moving like shadows. The girl and her mother pretended they had escaped the fire late in the night. They told the neighbors they had been asleep when the flames caught and had run into the woods in a panic. People gathered around them, wrapping blankets around their shoulders and pressing warm hands to their backs. Sympathy poured from the crowd, overwhelming and almost unbearable. The girl kept her gaze low, terrified someone might look too closely and see the truth hiding beneath her trembling breaths. The quiet man stayed at a distance, blending into the trees again. He couldn't bear the attention. Every voice that reached his ears sounded like a question. What happened? How did it start? Where is the man? Even though no one asked him directly, the guilt pressed down on him so hard he had to lean against a tree just to stay upright. He watched the girl in silence, knowing the lie they had woven would only grow heavier with time. In the days that followed, the town searched for answers. A few men dug through the charred remains of the cabin, trying to find the source of the fire. They found melted metal, broken wood, but no sign of foul play, and no sign of the man. People suspected he was away on business or visiting family in another county. No one imagined the truth, that he lay deep in the ravine, hidden beneath stone and darkness. The girl's mother insisted they couldn't stay. The cabin was gone and the memories were too painful. They moved into a neighbor's spare room for a few days while they figured out what to do. The girl tried not to show how jumpy she had become. Every knock on the door made her flinch. Every stranger's glance felt like an accusation. At night, sleep slipped away from her. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment the lantern struck his skull. The way his body went limp. The way she didn't hesitate, not for even a breath. Her mother tried to comfort her, but the mother herself was breaking. She cried in secret, biting down on a cloth to keep the sound from waking anyone. She told herself she had saved her daughter. She told herself it was the only choice they had. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the man falling over the ravine, disappearing into the dark without a sound. The guilt curled itself around her ribs and stayed there. The quiet man struggled even more. In town, people talked about him like he was invisible again. They assumed he kept to himself out of habit, never knowing he spent his nights standing near the ravine, staring into the darkness as if expecting the past to climb out. He had nightmares now, ones that felt too real. He saw his wife reaching out from the ravine. He saw the man's lifeless eyes staring up at him. And worst of all, he saw the girl screaming as the stones pulled her downward. He wanted to leave Briar's hollow, but every time he imagined walking away, he saw the girl's face. He knew she carried a weight she shouldn't have to carry alone. He told himself he had been protecting her, but he also knew he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. The town changed, too. The loss of the man, the wealthiest and most influential figure in the area, sent people into confusion. Some said he abandoned his responsibilities. Others whispered darker things, but fear kept their voices low. A few believed he had died in the fire, but there was no body to prove it. And without proof, the imagination of the town turned wild. Rumors began to swirl. People claimed they saw strange shapes moving near the ravine at night. Others said they heard someone calling from the depths. Superstitions took root quickly, especially among the older folks who believed the ravine was cursed long before the town was built. Reporters from a nearby county arrived a week later asking questions about the missing man and the fire. The girl's mother spoke carefully, choosing each word like it might cut her. The girl stayed silent, hands folded tightly in her lap. She felt the reporters' eyes on her and sensed they knew she was holding something back. They always seemed to linger just a little too long on her face, searching for cracks. When the reporters asked the quiet man for a statement, he shook his head and walked away. He felt their suspicion follow him down the road. As days turned into weeks, the search for the missing man faded. Without a body, without evidence, the town slowly accepted that he had abandoned them. Some were relieved. Others were angry, but life moved on even when the truth stayed buried. Yet the three who knew the truth could not move on. The girl carried her fear like a second skin. She started avoiding mirrors because every time she looked at her reflection, she didn't see herself. She saw the moment she struck him, the way her hand didn't tremble until after it was done. She hated herself for it, and she hated how part of her still believed she had done the right thing. Her mother became protective to the point of suffocation. She checked windows twice, sometimes 3 times a night. She watched the girl constantly, terrified she might slip away into the woods and confess everything out of guilt. Her face aged years in just a few weeks. She barely slept, barely ate. The weight of the lie carved deep lines across her once soft features. The quiet man into himself. Some days he walked the forest paths endlessly, fighting the feeling that someone was watching him. One night he stood at the ravine and whispered apologies to the darkness. He knew he had helped save the girl, but he also knew he had helped hide a body, helped bury a truth that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. He feared the day the ravine gave up its secrets. Deep down, each of them understood something unspoken. The crime had not ended the night the lantern struck the man's skull. It lived on, in every lie, every sleepless night, every glance over the shoulder. The fire had burned the cabin to ash, but it hadn't erased what they had done. And the ravine, silent and cold, kept the truth sealed away, but only for now. Sooner or later, secrets in Briar's hollow had a way of finding their way back to the surface. The years that followed the crime seemed to move more slowly than any season the ravine had ever known. What once felt like a living, breathing place, full of wind, wildflowers, and the soft croak of night insects, now carried the weight of something broken. People rarely spoke about that day out loud, but the memory of it lived quietly in the background of every conversation, every Sunday prayer, every sideways glance exchanged in town. Nothing in the region would ever return to what it once was. When the sheriff finally reached the ravine and pieced together the events, it didn't take long for suspicion to fall on Thomas. His clothes were torn, his hands shaking, his voice stuck somewhere between explanation and apology. He told 3 different stories before the day was over, each one trying to make the truth sound smaller or more accidental. But guilt has its own smell, its own way of showing itself in the eyes. Most people could see it before any confession came. Some believed he acted out of blind fear. Others insisted it was rage. A few said they always knew he would snap one day. Whatever the truth was, it was clear that Thomas himself had no idea how to face what he'd done. He tried to explain the shadows he saw in the woods, the pressure building in his chest, the sense that something was watching him from the moment he stepped into that ravine. Maybe he hoped people would understand the fear that had grown inside him. But the more he spoke, the stranger his words became, and soon even he stopped believing that any of it would save him. When he finally lowered his head and mumbled that he never meant for it to go so far, no one felt relief. His confession didn't heal anything. It only confirmed the darkness they were all afraid of. The trial was fast, not because people wanted revenge, but because the whole community needed some kind of answer before they drowned in rumors and terror. The courtroom was filled every day, people standing shoulder to shoulder along the walls, listening to the slow recounting of the events. Some cried, some stared blankly ahead. Others looked down at their hands as if afraid to meet the eyes of anyone else in the room. Every piece of evidence felt like another door closing behind Thomas, locking him deeper into the consequences he had created for himself. When the verdict finally came, Thomas didn't fight it. He didn't speak. He didn't look at the judge or the crowd or even the floor. He just sat still, as if the weight of everything had finally settled long enough for him to understand it. He had taken a life. He had allowed anger, fear, and pride to lead him down a path he could never come back from. And whether he admitted it out loud or not, he knew that the justice being delivered was the only thing left to give the world some sense of order again. As for the families involved, the pain did not end with the trial. It followed them home, lingered in every room, and waited in the spaces between their breaths. The victim's family tried to navigate the grief by holding on to small memories, laughter, stories, moments before everything went wrong. They tried to convince themselves there had been signs they could have caught. They tried to forgive what couldn't be undone. But grief moves at its own pace, and for them, the world felt permanently unbalanced. Thomas's family suffered in a different way. Some defended him quietly, insisting that he had been pushed, overwhelmed, or poisoned by stress or confusion. Others struggled to understand how someone they loved could have done something so terrible. It tore them apart in ways that would take years to repair. Neighbors who once shared meals and borrowed tools now avoided them on the street, unsure of the right words or unwilling to say any at all. The weight of the crime pressed on both families, different in shape but equal in force. The town itself changed, too. People no longer walked near the ravine after sunset. Children were warned not to wander near the woods alone. The old stories of the witches, once nothing more than myths told to scare children, grew stronger in the minds of the townsfolk. Some said the ravine cursed those who stepped into it with heavy hearts. Others claimed it revealed the truth inside a person, no matter how dark that truth might be. And though no one could prove any of it, the fear stayed. It grew roots. It became part of the place, the same way the trees and stones were. The story sparked conversations about justice, but also about the fragile line between fear and violence. People wondered how much pressure a person could carry before something inside them snapped. They talked about the dangers of letting anger sit too long, of ignoring the warning signs in those around them. Some admitted quietly, when no one else could hear, that they had seen their own darker thoughts reflected in Thomas's actions. They weren't proud of that. But it made them more aware of how thin the boundaries of human behavior really were. The crime also forced the community to confront deeper issues, power, pride, and the way people handled conflict behind closed doors. Many started to realize that silence had played a role in the tragedy. People had seen the tensions growing weeks before the crime, yet no one stepped in. Some said it wasn't their place. Others convinced themselves that the problems would work themselves out. But now, looking back, the message was painfully clear. Ignoring trouble doesn't stop it. It only gives it room to grow. In time, some people began to heal. The seasons changed, and the world continued moving, even when hearts were still stuck in the past. But healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant learning to live with the broken pieces, trying to understand what led to such a terrible moment, and finding ways to stop anything like it from happening again. The townsfolk learned to check on each other more often. They learned to speak up when someone seemed too burdened or too angry. They learned that community wasn't just about sharing joys. It was also about sharing responsibility. As for the ravine, it stayed the same physically. Same twisting trees, same sinking fog, same quiet whispers at night. But people saw it differently. It became a reminder of the thin line between control and chaos, between fear and violence. Some said the woods would always carry the memory of what happened, that the ground itself had absorbed the pain. Others believed the ravine didn't cause anything. It only revealed what was already inside the hearts of the people who walked into it. Years later, when people retold the story, they spoke less about the crime itself and more about what it taught them. They wondered how many tragedies in the world were born not from wicked hearts, but from wounded ones. They talked about how easily small resentments could grow into something unrecognizable if no one dared to stop them. They admitted that understanding human behavior was messy and uncomfortable, but necessary. In the end, justice was served in the legal sense. Thomas paid for his actions, but justice didn't erase the pain or bring back what was lost. True justice, people realized, wasn't just about punishment. It was about learning, changing, and trying to prevent the same mistakes from repeating. It was about facing the truth of human nature, even the parts that scared them. And so the story settled into the bones of the town, becoming something that shaped the people long after the trial ended. It reminded them that human beings carry light and darkness in equal measure, and that the choices made in moments of fear or anger can echo far beyond the moment itself. It warned them that power, pride, and silence can be just as dangerous as any weapon. And it urged them, quietly but firmly, to look out for one another, to face their own shadows, and to never forget the price paid when a fragile world finally breaks.